Ellie, would you give a more formal introduction to our speaker today, that your co-speaker?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can introduce a little bit about Chelsea and a little bit about our work together, and then happy to fill in any gaps as well. Yeah, so I'm so excited and honored that Chelsea is here speaking to us today. So just a little bit of background about her. So she's a multifaceted professional bridging spiritual scholarship, creative expression, and holistic healing. So Chelsea is both the vice president of publishing for the Swedenborg Foundation and a trained internal family systems practitioner, coach, and body worker. And internal family systems is an evidence-based therapy for conditions like trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. So Chelsea brings a really unique interdisciplinary approach to understanding human experience. Um, yeah, so one thing that Chelsea also recently published is this incredible book that this is how we got connected to each other called Opening the Inner World, Spiritual Healing, Internal Family Systems, and Emmanuel Swedenborg. So that's an exploration kind of combining the insights of Swedenborg with those of internal family systems therapy, which, if you are able to read the book, there really is just like a fascinating amount of overlap. Yeah, so Chelsea and I got connected because I reached out, I think, looking for a copy of the book because I saw it and I was like, oh my God, this is so exciting. And we have been talking regularly for about a year now. And we're both very fascinated by the idea of combining psychological science with spiritual tools to help better facilitate healing, whether in like a therapeutic context or like in within a broader spiritual context. And over the course of that, I think we have both just found that like Swedenborg is so uniquely psychologically minded, and with, for example, IFS just blends incredibly well with it. So, in my work, as Rich mentioned, I'm doing a PhD in clinical psychology right now. And the really cool thing about this type of research is that it really is both an art and a science. And what I have kind of realized is that there's one side of it where you're kind of and the healing side of it, it's a kind of a creative, like spontaneous, like practical act where you're kind of devising these things. And then usually what happens is that someone goes and invents these things, and then the scientists go and try to understand what they did. That's usually how the invention process works. So it's been really cool for Chelsea and I's goal is really to just kind of like facilitate each other's ideas, like spur each other on, and also try to eventually bridge this gap like much more. So I think what Chelsea will be sharing today, she's been doing just really incredible practical work trying to implement Swedenborg's ideas in therapeutic contexts. So really excited to hear about that. I'm happy to share kind of what I've been working on, and thanks so much for being here. Such an honor.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellie and Rich and Katarina and the whole community here for welcoming me here today. And yes, Ellie and I have enjoyed greatly this connection that we've had this last year. And uh, and perhaps in the Q&A we can be talking about the sort of potential directions that we see and what could happen from here. But you'll hear that I'm going to be taking a pretty personal tack in my presentation today. Um, and because really I feel like it'll give you a sense of where this is originating from for myself and what really makes me passionate about this direction of exploration. So I'm going to start by taking us back to a time when I was in eighth grade. We were assigned a project to write a storybook. We needed to both write the story and create illustrations. It sounds simple enough, but this experience is etched in my memory on account of how much mental toil and suffering I navigated in order to complete the task. I can still remember the feeling of the hateful antagonism toward myself that matched and overtook every ounce of creativity that attempted to come through me. Growing up, after my mom died when I was 10, entering my preteen and early teen years was excruciating. My system accommodated by shutting things down inside and not engaging in my outer world much. I would complete tasks, but could not let myself touch what was just below the surface, a hot, burning, molten layer of self-hatred. This is a trauma response. and one that is actually incredibly useful, although perilously detrimental. Like the body's natural healing and immune response, if it comes on too strong or unmitigated, it actually brings about the thing it's trying to forestall. My psyche spent the better part of 25 years in a logjam of self-hatred and dissociation. But this balance actually allowed me to survive. Swedenborg writes a very counterintuitive thing, that what he calls inherited evil actually serves to nourish us in our childhood and into adulthood through our process of rebirth until we are transformed. I've come to read inherited evil as generational trauma. And understood this way, it can also describe the evil of trauma that comes into our systems during our lifetimes. The word trauma means wound, and psychological trauma is generally understood as the wounding that comes from events that cause overwhelming distress to a person's system. One of Swedenborg's simplest definitions of evil is very close to that of trauma. He writes, evil and sin, viewed in themselves, are actually a rift with goodness. In fact, evil consists in disconnection. Another way to put this is that evil, a rift with goodness, is the belief that we are bad, the moral meaning we ascribe to ourselves based on our life experiences. Swedenborg writes, the only reason evil is ever attributed to us as ours is that we believe and convince ourselves that we think it up and do it on our own. So we make it ours. If we believed the fact of the matter, goodness from the Lord would be attributed to us, not evil. My mom died, and I was in pain. I was traumatized, not only by her death, but by a childhood also troubled by alcoholism and other addictive patterns in my family. But my parts assigned personal moral meaning to this. I am bad. Something's wrong with me for feeling this pain, and so I must hate myself for being so bad and broken. It's amazing to reflect back on that 8th grade assignment, now having witnessed all 3 of my own children as 8th graders. And I can see how what was missing for me then was simply love. But my system had been fortified against it. Because it's actually easier and less excruciating for our systems to hate ourselves and reject love than it is to feel the pain of believing ourselves to be unloved and unlovable. So as I came of age, I felt an acute dissonance between the spiritual ideas I was being taught and the relentless inner pain I was in. If I was to have any hope, I needed something that actually worked. Something that would have noticeable impact at the level and depth of my suffering. It didn't matter how much I was told that God is love. I needed to feel it and know it in my inner experience, or it meant nothing at all. I longed for healing. As it turns out, the word salvation comes from the Latin root word salvus, which can mean safe and healthy. And the Latin verb salvare can mean to heal and to save. So healing and salvation are synonyms. Taking salvation out of the domain of religious ideology and instead thinking in terms of healing went a long way for me and my system to make what Swedenborg writes about more useful and practical. Swedenborg describes the inner workings of the process of salvation, of our rebirth. And you heard about it in one of the readings for today, how we're made up of vessels which at first are turned away from the life force of the divine, but then this inflow from the Lord repositions the vessels to receive itself. That's the journey of healing. But even reading that and growing up with these ideas, in my experience, nobody was ever saying, You have agency in this process. You're going to experience this inflowing life as yourself, and you're going to witness and experience what it's like for the vessels to turn toward the inflow. But that active inner awareness is what's been most beneficial and healing for me. By agency, I don't mean responsibility to control or fix things. A key principle in Swedenborg's theology is that we live as if of ourselves, but that all life is really coming from the divine. Again, this can be understood as an intellectual acknowledgement, but for me to heal, it needed to become applied and experiential. Healing is not from me, but it happens through me when I engage in my inner world with awareness and intention. As Swedenborg puts it, that which is animated by the Lord in a person is the very thing which makes it seem as though it were from himself. As an applied principle, I can use this internally. When I extend self-compassion from my inner self to a part in my outer self, I am experiencing it as me taking an inner action, but it is really me being a conduit of divine inflow. We can be consciously engaged in our inner world, receiving inflow and responding relationally to what we find there. So, what he writes about vessels becomes pragmatic because we can experience it and sense it firsthand. For me, making this switch from abstract to immediately practical changed everything. Looking at it this way, Swedenborg's writings become an instruction manual, more like a user guide, saying this is how your inner psyche works, and you can be an agent in that system with awareness. And just as one example, Swedenborg talks a ton about the inner self. But really, why? What is the use of Swedenborg telling us so much about the inner self if it's something that's unavailable to us or beyond our comprehension? Why bother calling it a self if you don't experience it as yourself? You do experience it as yourself. You are experiencing it as yourself, and you can come into a deeper and deeper awareness of how that works and relates to the outer parts of yourself. There is so much more I could get into on this, but we only have so much time right now. So suffice it to say, it's normal and natural that we begin thinking externally about things, but our awareness can gradually awaken to our inner experience. The aha for me has been to recognize that I have a three-dimensional interior space within which I can act and engage and be in inner relationships with all the parts of myself. Our mind, psyche, soul, spiritual identity is really a system. It's not a unitary, homogeneous thing. It is a system of parts. And when you understand the levels and design, you have much greater inner agency and can experience deep healing. You really have everything you need to be present to anything that arises in your experience. How does this healing actually happen? How do we enter our inner world and open ourselves to divine inflow? For me, the journey was through my body, through deep listening. Now, we can often feel at war with our bodies, so I in no way want to make light of what really is, as some people say, the longest journey, the 6 inches from your head to your heart. And my healing took me through a journey of surrendering to my body and finding that it was trustworthy in the messages that it was giving me when I listened. Swedenborg's definition of love becomes inwardly practical here. He writes, The essence of love is loving others who are outside oneself, wanting to be one with them, and blessing them from oneself. All healing happens in relationship because this is where love is alive. When we step into a relationship with our bodies and our inner experience, we open the path to healing. For it to be truly a relationship, you have to acknowledge the other as outside of yourself, even if you're obviously connected. And that means this other thing, whatever it is, has a certain level of autonomy. And all the same principles of your relationship with the divine applies to your relationship with any part that you're interacting with. I want to offer you some instructions you can use to explore this for yourself. And since I know this is being recorded, you can come back to this when you want and practice it on your own. And if you want, you could play with it some as you listen now. But kind of the basic steps to try this out is that you can start by picking anything in your sensory experience as a trailhead for opening your inner world. You can begin by allowing your attention to settle its focus on any part of your experience. Like right now, I could choose like my feet feeling a little bit fizzing. Maybe it's how I'm sitting. You can begin by allowing your attention to settle its focus. And again, it could be a sensation like what I mentioned, or an emotion, or a thought. And if you notice a lot of resistance in your system, you can acknowledge and honor that, listening for what it wants you to know. I've spent years simply being with the resistance in my own system and my reactions to that resistance. But if your system allows it, then notice the qualities of the thing you're focusing on. Does it have a certain shape or limits? Is it moving? What's the texture? What's its weight and tension? Feeling it from the inside. As you do this, it might coalesce into what you could call a representation, a visual form, where you're like, oh, it kind of feels like you know, a fan, or, there might be associations that come up with it. And then you can name silently with words or actions your willingness to open to divine inflow, to allow it to come through you to the part you are focusing on. And you may feel an opening or a softening. And simply notice whatever arises in your awareness. And as you go through this opening relationship, you can actually ask questions of the thing you're focusing on, whatever might be arising from your curiosity about it. And then you wait for a response. And the response might come as feelings or words. And you can trust whatever it is you notice, even if it doesn't make immediate sense. And whenever you feel complete, you can thank the part for sharing itself with you, and you can come back anytime to this kind of exploration. So that's just a brief description of how a practice might go of engaging your awareness and beginning a relationship with a part of yourself. Every part acts as if of itself. So we don't come in and change things. Every part has its own process of consent. And that's why it's very easy for parts like mine to hold on to the moral meaning that they give things for a long time. It's a slow dawning of recognition that love is actually real, and the appearances that they've been living with are not the truth. The traumatic loss that happens is believing the appearance of our disconnection from love, our rift with goodness. And healing is the recognition of our abiding and eternal connection to love and opening ourselves to that inwardly. We can trust that our very bodies themselves are in this current toward healing. We are being carried. We're not accomplishing our salvation, our healing. We are opening ourselves to it and participating in it. Swedenborg says, "The Lord does not rest until love takes the lead." So I invite you to try this, to explore this kind of inner dialogue, whether written or verbal, and to be in relationship with your body through listening. And I'm not saying it's not intense. It's very intense. And I've only scratched the surface here, but as Ellie said, we explore these ideas much more in the book Opening the Inner World. And I'm currently very energized about these events and that I'm developing that really make these ideas practical for people to support people in applying them to their own inner experience. And so I have parts that want me to name that healing is really possible. Things have fundamentally changed within me, much to the relief of my system. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. So, what I've shared here is far from comprehensive, but these principles have helped me navigate the journey, and I hope they can be helpful to you on yours.
Thank you, Chelsea, for those words of wisdom. Before we open up to questions, I wanted to turn to Ellie first, since you've been working together, and see if you have anything, not put you in the hot spot, but just because you've worked together and you might have some also insights from your work. Anything that you want to say, Ellie, before we open it up?
Yeah, great question, Rich. I guess first, Chelsea, thank you. That was such a beautiful and concise yet rich kind of explanation of what this healing process can kind of look like. I guess the only the two other I want Chelsea, I'd love for you to share more about the workshops you're doing just because I think they're really cool and impactful. From my end, I can add that this kind of process that Chelsea is describing is touching something I think very deep within the therapy field, within kind of the healing field of this kind of like loving awareness of your internal self and of your body. And as embark on more training to become a therapist, this really seems to be kind of like a deep principle that carries across like therapy modalities. Um, and then with the addition here of being able to kind of harness a spiritual source to help kind of provide that love to you, which you could see being especially useful, for example, in people who have never had someone love them, who don't have the experience of like feeling that they're loved or lovable to draw on, or don't feel like that can kind of come from them. So yeah, ideally in future work, I would love to just yeah, document this as just like a fundamental thing that we're capable of. From the far other side of it, the like science side of it, another thing Chelsea and I talk a lot about is the need for, so in our generation, there's so many people who have never been raised religious. I wasn't raised religious, or people who have left religion for various reasons, but still have this kind of very deep spiritual hunger. So we talk a lot about how therapy can kind of, or the things that Chelsea's working on can help kind of serve that space. Um, and sorry, okay. And so one thing that I'm working on with another friend of mine is a big research study. So we don't actually know very much why people leave religion and why people join religion. Kind of what are the different factors and if those are similar or different. So a friend of mine and I are working on a big study where we're going to like analyze this big online data set where people talk about why they left religion, generally speaking, or kind of what drew them to it. We're going to use some like AI models to classify it essentially, but I can share the results because I think it would be really useful here as well. But that can kind of help paint my hope with that project is it can kind of help illuminate some of the mental health or spiritual struggles that people might be going through that something like this could also be useful for. So that's what I'm up to currently. Yeah, thanks so much, Chelsea.
Nice. Yeah. And just to respond to your, I'll take it as a question. Like what we have been doing is in August, the Swedenborg Foundation launched and had its first what I'm calling inflow retreat. So it was a 3-day immersive retreat that combined Swedenborg and internal family systems with uh, embodied practices and expressive arts practices to have just again, like Ellie's saying, a crossover between sort of Swedenborg adding a layer of spirituality and like a spiritual framework to uh, healing and inner work. So that was really wonderful, and we're designing and looking forward to doing more things like that.
Great, thank you. Thank you both for bridging this gap between therapy and spirituality in the way that you're doing, and with these stories. I have one quick question, and I'm going to open it up. But one quick question, your story, Chelsea, just so I was tracking. So, the death of your mother at 10, did that lead to a self-hatred? Did you blame yourself, or I missed that bridge right there? Was something that really, that trauma of that, or how would you explain the impact of that, where you then had this like literal self-hatred because your mother
Yeah.
died?
Yeah, I mean, I can only say that it's been in the last, 4+ years that I've been doing this kind of inner work and getting to know my parts. Like, all I know is that I just lived in that self-hatred. Like
Hmm.
there was no, I didn't know where it was, why it was there, anything like that. And then and that's one of the interesting things about like your outer experience. Like you're just on this onslaught of negative self-talk, right? And
Hmm.
then when as I've gone inside and I actually get to know the parts, it's actually that there's a part that feels like it needs, that it's hating myself actually as a protection to keep me from feeling a deeper just shame that thinks that I'm unlovable.
Hmm.
So it's like it's this, you could think it's the strangest thing, but it actually makes sense on this inner level that like that self-hatred is actually protecting me from the pain of feeling a shame of thinking that I'm unlovable. So that's sort of, and that unlovableness, I think, is what is that moral meaning I'm talking about, that we just take in from our experiences. If you're crying, crying or suffering, or and you don't have a parent or loved one who's able to come and take care of you right then, it doesn't mean
Hmm.
that you're not actually loved. But as a child, you can really take that in and think, something's wrong with me
Exactly.
here. And
Yes.
that can just be compounded, especially if you're sort of having um, the like for me, lived growing up through my teen years and not having the loving energy of a mother in my life for that time.
Thank you for just making that so explicit. Appreciate that. And I really appreciated the story, too, because it really frames it so personally. So I appreciate that as well. I'm going to ask if anybody has a question. Please keep them the questions, not sermons, because I want to make sure we get as many people in as possible. I'm going to start in the room here, if anybody has it, a question for Chelsea or Ellie. No. Michelle, did you have? Let me just hand you this. People.
Hi, thank you for your story and sharing, because I do think the process of experiencing that conversation and then coming into that awareness with the body as part of spirituality is very powerful. And I was just wondering, so I've also been exposed to some of these things. How important is it to build community? How are you thinking about community around the work that you're doing now? And yeah, just curious about in general, how that is going, um, and maybe even ways that it would be maybe possible to incorporate it in the church. Right?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Yeah, there's so much great opportunity and potential there. I really love, like locally. I mean, I'm already connected with the IFS community in Philadelphia, but then also, just in it's through also the people who came to the inflow retreat. Like I'm wanting to build more of a community where, there's sort of a shared understanding of this language, or like set of clarity or something, of awareness of how our inner parts work, and this relationship between our inner self and our outer self. And whether that's through like a weekly or some cadence of just like a group where really we're all, uh, we're each on our own journey of healing and connecting with this, like the inflow. And then but that witnessing and shared support is just so meaningful. And so, I'd say it's all kind of in, like there's seeds right now that I hope will grow. And certainly if you're interested in anything, I love the thought of connecting with people who'd want to do more with these with these ideas, but definitely kind of having yourself witnessed, by others in this kind of inner work. For me, it just feels like that's the real stuff. So it's great. Hmm.
Thank you. And we'll definitely put information about your retreats into the newsletter. And you're also welcome if you ever want to do one in DC at our house here.
Great.
That would be really fun. Okay, questions, and we'll keep them concise. Sherry, you have your hand up.
Yes, can Scott and I both ask a
You
question?
can both ask a question.
Okay. First of all, Chelsea, you're both awesome, you and Ellie, and we would love to attend one of your workshops. The question I have, as someone who's done personal development work for 20 some years, I'm in the field, different kinds, including IFS. Why, in your opinion, do you think it's so gosh darn hard to actually make real changes? Like it's good, like you once you get it, you make some quick changes, but then so there's these deep things that you know it all. It's just so freaking hard.
Yes.
Curious why you think that.
Yes. Oh, I just have so much compassion for that feeling. And life is long and hard. And the word that comes to my mind is providence, that we so often, you'll probably be familiar with this. IFS has sort of this principle that it's one of these ones that aligns with Swedenborg, that when we change things internally, it has an influence on our external system. So the external system reflects our inner system. And so often things that feel hard, we can attend to that feeling inside of ourselves, and shifting the relationship with it. The external situation might not change in an obvious way, and yet we've changed inside in our relationship to it because we feel more connected to love, to that love inside. I do think, you know, for myself, I'm doing a series right now also on applying these ideas to the 7 days of creation, seeing the 7 days of creation as the lens for awakening awareness. And I really think that image of our outer self as an earth, as this thing that has all of these different terrains and creatures and, all of this stuff going on, we are just always in relationship with that. And learning to be like the way that I feel like continents shift, like it's slow, or like, like when were the Appalachian Mountains created or the Himalayas, like just speaking from my own experience, like this healing that emerged in my system felt like there was labor for a long, long time, but then there was a time of birth, like and then there's more, we go through, again, Swedenborg uses just the great analogy of birth, of pregnancy and birth to describe spiritual development. And I think sometimes we're in labor for a long time, and it can feel like, when is this ever going to end? But then, we have those moments of reconnection, or when you look back on your life, you're like, things are still hard, but that really changed. That has not been the same. Or that's what I've noticed in myself. That is like, even even in working on this talk, I'm like, also was having a hard day today, like just like that's just there's not like okay, great, now we're over the other side and it's just smooth sailing forever. It's like we're always navigating this terrain, but that's what I mean by having that greater agency of kind of that recognition of like opening. I think we are just progressively opening our receptivity to the inflow of love and wisdom from the divine, and providence is sort of taking care of that, is kind of governing that process. So that's
Hmm.
what's occurring to me. Mhm.
Excellent answer. Thank you.
Yeah. I really liked how you were saying that self-hatred, it kind of protects you from the guilt, the other deeper ones, which are guilt or unworthiness.
Yeah.
Um, and I think sometimes before you get to self-hatred, you just have anger,
Yeah.
and then the anger is really masking the self-hatred, and the self-hatred is masking the unworthiness. And so
Yes.
my question on it was, do you think in parallel with that at the same time, you also had anger towards God? The self-hatred was also self-hatred towards God.
Yeah, that's such a good question. Um, I let's see. I feel like I had a lot of anger toward the way people were teaching me about God. I don't know about, like there was somehow this part of me that kind of hung on to a sense of providence, like that divine providence was something that was real. But then I just felt like I had zero patience for anything anybody was telling me about God. And, so I feel like I had more anger towards the people who were, trying to teach me about God and it not helping, like I sort of was frustrated by that.
Hmm. That's
And
kind of like
yeah,
Job's anger towards his friends
mm-hmm.
when they
Yeah,
were trying to tell him what's really going on with him. And they were,
yeah. And what just, yeah, it makes me like, yeah, I feel like I had just like this, the longing was always there. The longing to experience something, have this experience of what I was being told, that God is love, having it be real. And one of the first things that really came home for me for was uh, doing a regular self-compassion practice and actually using Tarbrock's rain meditation, which is recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture, these steps of sort of showing up to whatever's arising in your experience. But then connecting that with what I had learned from Swedenborg, I was like, okay, like if I'm feeling love, if I can even let myself imagine being loved, like that was really hard for my system. Like the first time it happened, I was able to sort of picture my grandparents being really loving toward me, like just their sort of open arms, this like,
hmm
Chelsea, just this love. But that was really hard for me to even open up to. But then when I could let
hmm
myself feel it, it was like my body is feeling different when I let that in. And to
hmm
realize that that isn't just an accident, that's the inflow of divine love into my body. So there
hmm
was like no questioning that like that's what I mean as far as like real, that like feeling it in my body. And then for a long time, it was the hardest thing. There's this practice of like wake up in the morning and start your day by saying like good morning, Chelsea, I love you. Like just saying you love yourself in the morning. So hard, like that took months. And that's what like Swedenborg says, it's a thawing, like it's this softening. The vessels in us soften, and that softening takes a long time. But that's yeah. But when we do, the love is always there. We're never not being carried by that. That's the
Yeah,
gift.
I appreciate
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I like that. The love is always there. I was in a meeting of civil society group, and they put us in small groups and asked us this last week, what recurring mantra or thought has really helped you in your life? Very secular group. And Chelsea, it made me think of your sermon because I said that I always knew God loved me, even when I felt rejected by everybody else. And I think
Mhm.
that's something we can all remind ourselves of, that no matter what is happening, no matter what people think of us, whatever, God loves us. It's consistent and ongoing. And just that reminder, I think it saved my life knowing that. So I hear that with you in answer to the question. We're going to thank you very much for the great insights. We look forward to you doing a training here at Swedenborg House someday in the near future. We have a whole room ready for you to do it in. And so we're excited. But thank you so much for your work. And Ellie, thank you for this partnership and for bringing this all together for us today and bringing this into our worship service. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.